Okay, so let's get into discussing Meterpreter. It's kind of an interesting word, has a Metasploit type of feel to it. And the Meterpreter is a payload that can, once it's delivered, you get a very highly functional shell on that remote system, and you can do all kinds of other things. A Meterpreter basically only will exist in memory on the target system. So this gives you a lot of stealth options as well, since you're not necessarily writing to disk if you're careful and you're choosing the correct options. So I've got my Metasploitable instance already booted up. I know that there's a particular vulnerability which I'm just going to exploit really quickly. We can explain a little bit more about it later, but for the sake of demonstrating the Meterpreter shell, I'm going to go ahead and connect. So let's hit our back command. I'm going to see which. All right, good. I'm in my Metasploitable workspace. Now I know that Metasploitable has a Postgres database, just like Kali does actually. And lucky for us, through some experimentation and scanning, I've discovered that the default login and password for Postgres is in place. And that means that the username and the password are both Postgres. A lot of software applications will do this. You install the software, database, a web server, what have you, and you get a default credential set. So what I'm going to do is do a quick search for Postgres exploits, because I'm not sure if I remember exactly what the exploit is called. I've got a nice window here, and I believe the one that I want is this guy right here, the Postgres payload. As we can see, this is rated as an excellent payload. So that gives me a good idea that the payload will work. One thing I want to do beforehand is do a set G for my remote host. That way I don't have to type this in every time. I know that my Metasploitable instance is .129, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. You can do set -G if you wish. I think set G is just a little bit easier to deal with. Okay, so now I want to use this particular exploit. So I'll type my use command, copy and paste this. Now I'm in the context of the Postgres payload. So if I show my options, I can see that it's got a default database to search, or rather for authentication purposes, and my username is already pre-populated with Postgres. I know that the password is supposed to be Postgres based on my research. So what I can do is I can set password. Another thing I meant to point out earlier is that you notice for the options for each module, they are not case sensitive. Your entries, the settings are case sensitive. If I put in something that's uppercase that's supposed to be lowercase, it's obviously not going to work. But for my password, I know that it's supposed to also be Postgres. So I'll go ahead and set that. If I verify my options, I can see that everything looks good to go. Notice that the target is showing me a Linux x86, which is good because that's appropriate for this particular target. I can also check to see if there's any advanced options, and there are. We don't need any of these for this particular exploit, but it's good to just poke around when you're looking at an exploit to see what its capabilities are. Targets, it's either x86 or 64-bit x86, so I've got two different options there. But the one that I've got selected should work, so I'm going to go ahead and type exploit. You can type run as well as a command to actually execute the exploit. I like exploit better because it's more descriptive. Okay, so let's look at what we have here. I started my reverse handler on my local system. So I'm listening, my Kali instance is listening on port 444. So that's what my local port will be. It's not shown here in my options. It's predefined as part of the exploit. Some of them are like that. You just have to explore each exploit as you use it in order to find the right one. So we've connected to the target system on port 5432. This is also a default port that Postgres listens on. And we can see that we've got a banner grab. So I got some really good information here. I know this is Postgres version 8.3.1. I can see that it's running on Linux, and I can see a kernel information here, Ubuntu 4.2.3. So I'm also getting some good information about the target in addition to being able to connect. So I've transmitted my stager, and if you remember from our previous discussion, the stager is a component of an exploit that helps you to build a connection. Then the stage itself gets sent, so we see that there's 1.49 meg worth of data, and the stage actually is the component of the exploit that actually builds the connection. Now I can finally see that I've opened my Meterpreter session between my local system 131 and the remote system 129. And of course we know that the Meterpreter worked because I've got a Meterpreter prompt now. Like you would expect, I can type the help command to see what options I've got available within Meterpreter, and there's quite a few here. We'll explore the majority of these throughout our course. I would expect that you would poke around and try some of these options on your own as well, because you want to understand what Meterpreter can do for you. But some really easy things to think about. One of the commands that I always like to think about early in a session is to use the background command. And that lets you put a session in the background and then return to it later. So I can run background. So it tells me session 1 has now been sent to the background. And this is good because now the session's still live, but I can get back to the context of my exploit if I want to run some other commands. For instance, I can run the sessions command, and this shows me my active sessions. I may have multiple sessions active with different systems at any given time, or even multiple sessions active with the same target system. I can see I've got a session ID here, session ID of 1. It tells me a type of shell and some other information about the system and my connection itself. Now if I want to go back into interacting with this sessions command, or with this session, you'll notice I can use the -I option. I can kill my sessions, I can list them, and so on. I can run scripts or some other advanced features. But for right now, what I want to do is go back to the session I've already created. So I'll do a sessions -I with a 1, because that's my session ID. Now I'm back in my Meterpreter shell. Once I'm in the Meterpreter shell, I can do lots of different things. For instance, I can look at my core commands. I already showed you background. I can also kill scripts that are running in the background. I can list the scripts running in the background. I can close channels. I can look at info about a particular module. I can load more extensions into Meterpreter. So this is a beautiful thing about Meterpreter. It acts as sort of a toehold on that remote system. Once you've got connected with the Meterpreter shell, now you've got a very flexible and interactive environment to bring other information and other tools and auxiliary modules and so on, or extensions. I can do those things in order to enhance my ability to interact with this system. I can still use and load modules and extensions just like you'd expect. I can even interact with the file system. I can cat a file. So for instance, let's first see what I'm running under. I'm thinking I'm in a command line shell. That's why I'm running the wrong commands there. But one thing I can do is try to see if I can look at, for instance, at maybe I've tried to compromise the system, and now I want to see if I can look at the password file. So as you can see, I've been able to look at this. Password file has some information in it that might be useful, but it really doesn't have any hashes. And see, I'm trying to run the Etsy Shadow, or trying to show the Etsy Shadow file, and that's not letting me do that. So I may not have all of the permission that I would like. One thing I can do, however, once I've got the Meterpreter shell established, is I can run the shell command to try to get a command shell. You'll notice I am not root on this command shell, so that's why I could not run Etsy Shadow. I am logged in as Postgres, which we saw from the exploit options that we set up originally. I'm going to go ahead and exit that command shell. I don't need to be there. So I'm going to hit Control-C to terminate that channel. My Meterpreter shell is still valid, but that command shell that I launched is now terminated.